From Connecticut Public Radio in Hartford, this is Audacious. I'm Kyone Wolfe. Most of us have played sick at some point in our lives, especially when we were young. Remember Ferris Bueller's Day Off, when Ferris fakes being sick to get out of school?
The key to faking out the parents is the clammy hands. It's a good non-specific symptom. I'm a big believer in it. You fake a stomach cramp, and when you're bent over, moaning and wailing, you lick your palms. It's a little childish and stupid, but then so is high school.
Ferris not only gets the day off, but his fib explodes into a full-blown lie that he's hospitalized. Students at his high school even start a Save Ferris fundraiser for him. And while he didn't do it for pity, he sure seems to like it. But in the real world, there are some people who take things a step further. This sort of behavior becomes compulsive and dangerous. And it's not done to get out of doing something, but to get more attention and care from those around them. Today, hear from a woman who's lived with Munchausen Syndrome, also called Factitious Disorder. You'll learn about the lengths she went to appear sick, and the lengths she went to stop. But first, let's get a deeper understanding of what Munchausen Syndrome is and isn't with Dr. Mark Feldman. He is the guy you want to talk to about this attention-seeking condition, which, he says, doesn't, ironically, get enough attention. Dr. Feldman is a clinical professor of psychiatry and adjunct professor of psychology at the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa. And he's the author of many books, including Dying to be Ill, True Stories of Medical Deception. So when Dr. Feldman meets new friends and mentions his specialty in Munchausen syndrome, what kind of reactions does he get?
It's interesting that when people say, have you heard of Munchausen or do you work in Munchausen? They usually mean Munchausen by proxy, which is a form of child abuse. And in fact, I now call it Munchausen by proxy abuse to make it crystal clear that it's a situation in which a perpetrator, almost always the mother, feigns, exaggerates, or induces illness in her child for emotional gratification. But I have to ask them, which are you talking about when you say Munchausen? Munchausen syndrome, without the by proxy, is when you do pretty much the same thing, that is fabricate, exaggerate, or induce illness, but this time in yourself. The motive is gratification, once again, some kind of satisfaction from the attention, sympathy, care, concern that people get in our society when they appear to be ill. They may also enjoy controlling other people, including high-status professionals like doctors. And the range of illnesses that can be feigned is extraordinary. Cancer is probably number one. Everyone knows what it is. Everyone has sympathy right away, and the patient can count on that. But really, the variety of ailments that can be feigned in Munchausen syndrome, or factitious disorder, as it tends to be called by professionals, is limited only by the person's knowledge and creativity and their motivation to deceive others. Now, this differs from malingering, in that in malingering, which is not a mental illness, a person does the same thing once again, feigns, exaggerates, or induces illness, but the goal is something external and tangible. It may be disability payments, opioid medications, getting adjudicated not guilty by reason of insanity, avoiding military service. It's the sort of thing that you can kind of understand if you know what the person is facing at that particular time. People with Munchausen syndrome may get some of those benefits. They may get gifts or money, but that's not their principal motive. Their principal motive is intangible, and it's love, acceptance, and things that they feel unable to get in their everyday lives for one reason or another.
Now, you say this is a mental illness, and I think one thing I've assumed, is that people have this condition because they didn't get the love they wanted as a kid or something like that. But you're saying that it's not so much about a story of something that happened, it's a mental illness. So this is not so much a choice. Yeah.
That's correct, though it's different from other mental illnesses in that it does involve some choice and some deliberateness, some volition, in the same sense that pedophilia is a mental illness recognized by the American Psychiatric Association, but we certainly adjudicate and charge and sometimes incarcerate people who have sexually abused children. The same can be true in some subset of cases of factitious disorder. And specifically, it's called factitious disorder imposed on self when it's Munchausen syndrome, or factitious disorder imposed on another when it's Munchausen by proxy. And you can spend hours, we could easily spend the whole show just talking about terminology. And I use either Munchausen syndrome or factitious disorder. So, no one asks to have schizophrenia. No one decides to hallucinate because it's fun or gratifying. Nobody has delusions because it's gratifying. But factitious disorder, Munchausen syndrome, is unusual in that people do, at some level, make a choice to do what they're doing. It may feel compulsive. It may feel addictive and that they can't resist it, but that's not usually the case. When you look at the planning that's involved sometimes in hoodwinking doctors in the community, say about a diagnosis of cancer, you know that this isn't some unconscious process that's taking place, though their motives may be vague even to them. But the behaviors themselves are often very much pre-planned.
Who are we talking about when we look at those people who we know have factitious disorder?
The vast majority of people with factitious disorder are women. It tends to start in late adolescence or early adulthood. Many of them have a history of working as nurses or having training as laboratory workers. That is, occupations that show that they're pretty much fascinated with medical matters. And they now find this way of expressing that interest, but in a very unhealthy way that has a tendency in a lot of cases to explode in their faces when they're discovered to have lied about illness. And that does happen a lot.
How common is this? And I ask that knowing that that's probably a difficult question to answer because plenty of people do this and they don't even really, maybe on some level, know that they're doing it. And which I guess is another question, is how much do we know that they know that they're doing it? But how common is this as far as we know?
It's difficult whenever you're talking about something that is derived from deceit. I think we're missing the vast majority of cases. It takes quite a leap for doctors, community members, others, even family members to think this loved person is making up the report of cancer or multiple sclerosis or whatever it happens to be. So we don't have really firm statistics, but the American Psychiatric Association, in its Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which is also known as the Psychiatrist's Bible, says that about 1% of people being admitted to general medical surgical hospitals have actually feigned or induced the illness with which they're presenting.
1% is a lot.
It's a lot when you think about the number of patients, and also it's not unusual for the costs associated with caring for these patients and doing all the diagnostic tests and giving all the medications to top $1 million. Can be even more. So it's a public health problem that hasn't really been recognized as one. People prefer to sort of run in the opposite direction when they identify a case. Doctors don't like to deal with it. It can be professionally challenging and even embarrassing. And when I got started in the field, and here I'll date myself, it was about 1990, people told me this is going to be a dead end because these patients are untreatable. it just so happened the first patient I ever met who had feigned cancer, terminal breast cancer, shaved her head and eyebrows, dieted to lose 50 pounds, joined a breast cancer support group. She was a school teacher, and the students had dedicated their basketball season to her because she said she had terminal breast cancer. I mean, it was really a horrible case, but she did really well with treatment. And so I had a very different perspective. And I've encountered that over and over, some of the most severe cases I've ever encountered. And they would raise your hair if I told you all the deceptions that have taken place and just how harmful they've been to the person's body. It made me feel that almost all of them are treatable if they'll just acknowledge that there is some sort of problem that's getting in their way from having a fulfilling life. That's all we need. And we can get them to just try therapy one time, just meet with the therapist one time. You're not making a lifelong commitment. You don't have to keep going, but try it. And usually that succeeds. They do find that instead of having to go to doctors unnecessarily, like specialists and subspecialists and medical conditions, by meeting with a therapist, and it can be of any discipline, they're getting the time and attention that they had been getting through false pretenses. And in fact, were they to get sick a whole lot, it would undermine the capacity of that therapist to continue to offer that time and space. So I feel very optimistic even 30 years later. And that has carried me through my books and the lectures I give and the articles I write. And patients appreciate it. Factitious disorder patients view me as their advocate, and that makes me feel very good.
How does someone with factitious disorder make the leap from, I know this is wrong, but I know I need help? What would you say you've noticed in people who've been able to make that leap?
Most of them have finally come to recognize that this behavior is self-defeating. I know, for example, of a patient I treated for a couple of years who instilled Drano into her bladder repeatedly, thus forcing removal of her bladder and placement of an ostomy. That's how far she was willing to go. But she said at the same time, I was totally isolated. I was alone. I had few to no friends. And there was instant acceptance when I went to a hospital or an emergency room. And she was so desperate for that even the night before surgery to remove her bladder, she did it again with the Drano to be absolutely sure it would be removed. And it was a sign of her health a couple of years later that she got interested in someone of the opposite sex and had to wrestle with the issue of, if they got intimate, had to disclose that she has a urostomy. And we dealt with that issue and many others. But she kept saying, I don't need tons of attention. I'm just getting none, no sympathy. And I just have to do something to be noticed in this world. It's as if I'm totally anonymous, and that's hard. Now, she was also depressed, and depression often underlies factitious disorder. And shockingly, perhaps to some, it's a favorable indicator prognostically, because depression is really quite treatable, and it was in her case. And once the depression went away or was reduced, she no longer felt that same desperation. And desperation, this certainly is a desperate behavior. And she no longer felt that. And I've stayed in touch with her for almost 30 years, and she's just doing splendidly. So again, that fuels my feeling that my time has not been wasted. It's been spent in really positive ways that have helped patients' lives.
When you think about some of the most extreme, unbelievable, shocking cases that you've experienced in your decades in this work, what are one or two that come to mind?
The one that comes to mind is the woman who instilled Drano into her bladder, because that's just the start of what she did to herself. And she was a young, attractive woman, but again, feeling adrift. She did things like lacerate her vagina and then call the police and say she had been violently sexually assaulted. She self-induced frostbite, literally frostbite. That's not easy to tolerate and to do. She boiled lead items, drank the water, and induced lead poisoning. And it goes on and on. I had another case where a woman using a drill drilled 3 holes in her head and put week-old urine and saliva, sprayed it with a plant mister into her brain to induce a brain abscess. And when I first heard about this case, I said, obviously she's psychotic. She's lost contact with reality. She may think she's liberating evil spirits or something like that. The attorney assured me that wasn't the case, and he was right. She made some hideous decisions. Ultimately, she didn't die as a result of the brain abscess she did induce. She died as a result of getting medications from 21 different doctors, none of whom knew about the others. She was taking the medications as prescribed, and it killed her. Now, she sued doctors for malpractice, claiming they were the ones who were responsible for her brain abscess and other problems, but died before that case could be heard. I had been retained by the attorney for the defense and got to know that case extremely well and was sent pictures of this woman. And it was staggering to see what she had done to herself.
I'm not often speechless.
I've been doing this so long, I'm actually a little deconditioned, or desensitized, I should say, to these cases. I describe them matter-of-factly, but really at the time I'm called about a new case that's a new extreme, yes, it's very unsettling. And it takes a certain fortitude to say, yep, I'm going to wade in and I'm going to provide treatment if it's requested of me, and justice if there's an attorney involved and they want my assistance. But it comes up even more poignantly with Munchausen by proxy abuse cases or factitious disorder imposed on another, where we're talking about child victims who are helpless and whose caregivers will do whatever it takes to make them sick or appear to be sick. That can be hard to take.
The woman who's sharing this episode with you, who has factitious disorder, Cindy, she has bipolar disorder. How often is factitious disorder paired with other disorders?
It's almost always paired with personality disorders, which just means there are chronic maladaptive ways of trying to get needs met. Often we see narcissistic, histrionic, or borderline personality disorders. That's number one. I would say it's almost invariable that these patients have long-term unhealthy ways of trying to get their needs met with destructive actions rather than words. Instead of asking in straightforward ways for what they need, they harm themselves. They harm their bodies. They harm their reputations. And so I think that's common. Now, bipolar disorder per se also does emerge from time to time, but depression is the serious mental illness that I see most often. I did read, while it was still a manuscript, Cindy's book, and I think getting a mastery of her bipolar disorder, again, was a positive thing prognostically, because she's doing, as I understand it, pretty darn well right now. She may not have definitively turned her back on factitious disorder forever, but she's, doing so well that she could write a really riveting memoir about her experience that has helped loads of other people.
Do you find, because you've seen so much in this particular specialty, that you personally, when you're out in the world and you're meeting people, do you feel like this has made you more of, I don't want to say an untrusting person, but something like it?
It has at times. And I would have answered no until I heard about a case yesterday that sounds sincere. I don't recall what the medical ailment was, but my first or second thought was, do we know that this is true? Do we really know that the person is saying the truth? Because there are so many cases of false cancer that I can't keep track of them all. There are just dozens and dozens and dozens. And they're not just in the US, they're across the world. Though it tends to be medicalized, westernized, English-speaking countries, but not always. And I won't go so far as to say it's ubiquitous, but those who would dismiss Munchausen syndrome as a creation of medicalized societies are really not understanding it.
That was Dr. Mark Feldman. We'll hear from him again at the end of the show. When we get back, author Cindy Buckshon on how Munchausen syndrome manifested in her.
Generally, it would happen in the most dramatic situation possible where the most people could see me. Teachers, coaches, doctors, nurses, people in a bit of authority over me. Those were the people I did it around.
I'm Kyone Wolfe. This is Audacious. Stay with me. This is Audacious. I'm Kyone Wolfe. Cindy Buckshon is a Canadian illustrator, graphic designer, and the author of the memoir Liar, Liar, Gown on Fire. In it, she chronicles her lifelong struggle with mental illnesses, specifically bipolar disorder and factitious disorder, also known as Munchausen syndrome. That's when a person fakes an illness by lying about symptoms, making themselves appear sick, or intentionally making themselves unwell. I asked Cindy about her earliest memory of acting sick.
My first memory is when I was 4 years old. I was at my grandfather's house and I was on a set of stairs. And I think my mom had a stomach flu or a migraine or something. And I just remember feeling a bit jealous. And so I started kind of looking pathetic and holding my stomach and moaning and stuff. And I don't remember what the outcome of that was, but that was my first real memory. And then I had more later on.
And I understand that you started with pretending that you were having epileptic seizures. What inspired you to do that?
That was in high school. So I faked a fainting spell in front of my boyfriend to get his attention because he was being a bit of a jerk.
Wait, did it work?
It did. It worked very well. He rushed me to the hospital, all dramatic and everything.
So a lot of attention and care and love.
Yeah. And the doctor didn't seem too concerned or anything. He kind of blew us off, which is reasonable. But my boyfriend took me home and my mother gave me, I don't know whether there's a Merck manual or another book, and she had it open to a page on epilepsy. And she said, maybe this happened to you. And so that kind of planted the seed. And then as I went on, my episodes started looking more and more like seizures. I learned more about what they looked like and then, did some research and started getting more severe. So they looked like a real grand mal seizure. And I went to a neurologist and stuff and they knew it was all baloney. And so I got sent to a psychologist. But yeah, that was where it started.
My first thought with all this is you probably didn't get enough attention or feel enough love growing up. And so and we'll kind of get back to this later because there's so much more of your story to talk about. But I think, yeah, that's what happened. She didn't get the love that she wanted. And so she developed this method of getting it. Is that about right?
I'm not so sure, actually. I had a very good childhood. I did get more attention when I was sick and a different kind. And I don't think it's so much that I didn't get enough attention. It's something about that particular kind of being the patient, someone taking care of me, worried about me. That kind of attention was more powerful to me than just somebody regularly loving me and, affirming me and all that. So it was kind of weird.
When you would be like in the early stages of faking an epileptic seizure, can you talk about maybe the kernel of that feeling that sort of made it all happen?
Yeah, it was usually something where I was either bored or in distress, or I remember doing it at baseball games when I wasn't, when I struck out and all that stuff. And I kind of, it's kind of embarrassing, but I was always kind of in a feeling of a rush, like that feeling of it's going to happen. I'm going to do this, and very tingly. I don't like to say the word sexual, but that kind of intensity of feeling that came up before I did it. And then as I did it, I got that attention and that kind of met that need temporarily. But it was very physical, that feeling. I don't know how else to describe it.
Was it almost like a performance, like an improv performance?
I guess you could say that. I don't really, I never really thought of that way, but yeah, sure. And, it happened, in all different circumstances. Generally, it would happen in the most dramatic situation possible where the most people could see me. I found teachers, coaches, doctors, nurses, people in a bit of authority over me. Those were the people I did it around. I mean, I never did it around my family. I didn't really do it when I was just hanging out with friends, but I remember like sitting in the hallway trying to look pathetic so my teachers would notice me and say, "Are you okay?" and all that. So that authority thing was a big part of it.
This is all beginning to happen in 1992. And so the internet is not exactly as accessible as it is now. And you also had your mom's book on epilepsy, but I wonder how else did you learn about it so you could act it out more accurately?
Anytime I saw a doctor and they'd say, "Did you pee your pants?" or they ask another person that's with me, "Did this happen?" And then I stored it away and then they kind of developed and looked more and more real.
Did you ever pee your pants to make it
Yeah.
you did? What? It's funny. There's a part
I know, right?
there's a part of me that's I used to wet my bed until way later than I think was right, but I remember it would happen a lot in my dreams and I would feel it. And like at first it's such a great feeling because it's so warm.
It is, yeah.
But then it's not a
Yeah.
great feeling. When you would pee your pants, was there like a part of you that was like, "I'm nailing it," and the other part of you was like, "Crap, I'm gonna have to clean this up"?
Well, again, it was part of that visceral physical sensation. At first, it was very hard to do. To get yourself to pee in such a public situation and wet your pants is not easy. But eventually, as I got deeper and deeper, it just started to be possible. And then, yeah, I mean, it was great while it was happening and I was getting all the drama, but then I was waiting for paramedics in wet pants. So, and then I had to, wear hospital pants home or whatever. I can't remember what happened, but yeah.
But that was part of the deal that you were going for, right? It's almost like you got a new prop in these like scrubs you got at the hospital.
Yeah, and it definitely made the seizure seem more real to the medical profession because obviously not everyone would just do that. I hate to say it.
Another thing that I, as someone who doesn't know a damn thing about epileptic seizures, think about is biting your tongue. Was that ever something you did?
No, I never did that. I guess that would be just something I couldn't bring myself to do.
That was the line.
Yeah, that was the line. I mean, I face planted in concrete and knocked myself out, but I never actually bit my tongue, no.
When you did hit the concrete and knock yourself out, I mean, that had to have been like, I am 100% committed to this. I'm going to let what happens happen. And in that case, you really did get injured. And so was it sort of a twofer?
Yeah, I think a lot of it was that I didn't want to be faking. If I actually hurt myself, then it was legitimate. It was also like part of the drama. Again, it kind of had more of an impact on people, but I've at least given myself 7 concussions where I actually lost consciousness and then many, many more just hitting my head.
You'd mentioned earlier that your boyfriend reacted perfectly to this. Were there any reactions that kind of let you down and revealed something about either the person around you or your relationship with that person or people?
There were situations like that. And the blessing about those is I didn't keep doing it in front of that person. So it's horrible to say, but the people that loved me the most and treated me the best got the worst of my behavior.
Did anyone ever call you out on it?
My mom did once when I tried to do it in front of her because she's like, "Oh, you never do it around me. You never do it around me." So I'm like, "Okay, I better do it around her." And then she was really angry with me, but fair enough, right?
What are some of the more extreme things that you did to yourself?
I was going to be sent for an EEG, and I really wanted to have a seizure during the EEG so that I would be diagnosed with epilepsy. And so I thought, well, I started researching. I'm like, okay, what can I take that will trigger a seizure? And I found an article about camphor and seizures. And so I looked up where I could get camphor, and it was in Tiger Balm. And so what I did was I bought a bag of capsules, like you can buy just plain capsules.
Like empty ones?
Yeah, empty ones. And so what I did was I put Tiger Balm in each of those, and I swallowed the whole tin worth of Tiger Balm. And I don't know why I didn't get hurt. I mean, that could have been really bad news.
You've described this as an addiction. Will you tell me more about that feeling?
It's one of those things where once I did one, I did another and another and another. And it was very, very difficult to stop. Very difficult to stop. And it came back in my adulthood. Like it came back in like 2016. Not the seizures, but a fake out, like a blackout. And I didn't want to tell my friends that I'd done it, but my mind started spiraling so fast. And I started to think about the next thing I was going to do, the next thing and the next thing. So I thought, okay, I got to tell them. And I did. And that kind of stopped it. But that was a real eye opener. I mean, I knew it was an addiction, but that was like frightening. It's like how fast that happened.
Were there any other conditions that you were tempted to recreate?
Yes. I remember fairly recently, actually, it was 2020 when COVID was happening. I contaminated my CPAP machine. I won't tell you how, it's gross. But, I was trying to give myself a lung infection. I have exercise-induced asthma, and one time it was very smoky here due to forest fires, and I was going to see my doctor, and I started running up and down this big hill in the smoke trying to induce that. It's almost like when I get that inkling of a possibility that it can happen, then I'll take advantage of it, but only when I'm really struggling. Like it's not when I'm doing well, it generally doesn't happen.
It's interesting because it makes me think about how, like, on the one hand, it's one thing to fake an illness, and it's another thing to try to become ill, right?
Yes. And I think most of my behavior was because I was so not wanting to be a faker. I wanted to try and make myself actually ill, but it's all factitious disorder. You can, even if you make yourself ill, that's factitious. If you prolong an illness, that's factitious. If you don't do what the doctor says so that it'll get worse, that's factitious. Like all these things. And so I've got every aspect of that. I've done all of those things. Yeah.
You make me think about how I went through a really painful time in my life, and I'm super public about what I go through. And I remember after maybe a year of struggling, I was out and about, and someone said, "Hey, how are you?" And I was doing better, and I happened to say, "I'm good." And there was something in me that went, "No, don't tell them you're good. If you tell them you're okay, then they won't want to help you anymore. Then they won't be so nice to you anymore." And so there was a flicker in my head that said, "Don't tell them you're okay. Tell them what you told everybody else leading up to this, that you're not doing well," which was the case. But it was an interesting threshold moment where I realized I wanted to pull back my "I'm okay" because I thought if I was, that I wouldn't get the care and love, which feels like it lines right up with what you felt for a long time.
Yeah, for sure. I think everyone has inklings of this. I mean, it's a human condition. For example, I have hip arthritis now in both my hips, and I had a very severe flare in November. Like I couldn't get to my bathroom. It was hard to do my dishes, things like that. And it was horrible, and I wanted it to end. But now I tend to do things like run for buses, run if someone's waiting for me to crosswalk. And I'm like, is that me trying to trigger it again? Trying to get it back so that I've got that legitimate attention? And I think it probably is.
In your book, Liar, Liar, Gown on Fire, you said that you felt pampered when people would cover you in blankets or hold your hand after an episode. And I wonder why that feeling of care that you would get from strangers or teachers or whomever. I'd like to hear about why you think that currency of care was so valuable to you.
So I don't know why, I just know that it was. And the memories that I have that are strongest about this are when someone was especially tender to me. I have this one memory. I faked a lot of seizures on public transit when I was in university. And one of them, the bus driver came up and he gently touched my cheek with his hand, like he gently caressed me. And I was obviously conscious, but he didn't know that. So it was kind of a interesting thing that those moments were very special to me, and I'd cherish them, I guess you could say.
Do you think if you were getting that kind of loving attention, like all the time, like if you had a romantic partner, if you're into that sort of thing, who was super attentive and super nurturing, what effect do you think that would have on this compulsion?
I don't know. I have a very strong network of friends right now, But I think what I'm kind of gleaning is that, at least at this point in my life, it really is tied to bipolar disorder. So when I stop sleeping, when the mania creeps in or the depression, that's when the behavior starts. Because right now I feel perfectly loved. I mean, I also have a relationship with God. And so I go, okay, he's giving me attention all the time. His attention is always on me. There's never a moment when there's not. And so I draw myself back to that from time to time, trying to remember that. And like, I think to myself, I remember when I was first driving buses, and I'm not driving, I was servicing buses at the time. And my boss came on and he said, "You're doing such a good job. The bus looks amazing." And I thought, you know what? I'm going to always work for positive attention. And so that's the similar with God. I'm like, okay, I want to show him, my best.
That was Cindy Buckshon. Her memoir is called Liar, Liar, Gown on Fire. After the break, what was going on inside her when she wrote the truth down on paper and handed it to her doctor?
Oh, it was terrifying. As soon as he touched the paper, I started weeping because I needed to tell somebody, but at the same time, I was afraid of his reaction, and I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't compassion.
Plus, Dr. Mark Feldman talks about the ways that people with Munchausen syndrome can free themselves of it. I'm Kyone Wolfe. This is Audacious. Stay tuned.
There is fiction in the space between you and reality. You would do and say anything to make your everyday life seem less mundane. There is fiction in the space between.
This is Audacious. I'm Kyone Wolfe. We're getting to know Cindy Buckshon. In her memoir, Liar, Liar, Gown on Fire, she talks about her life with Munchausen syndrome. At times, she's acted as though she had epilepsy by falling down and peeing on herself. Once, she tried to induce a seizure by swallowing capsules she filled with Tiger Balm. And in 2020, as COVID-19 was spreading, she contaminated her CPAP machine in an effort to give herself a lung infection. Let's get back to our conversation. Will you tell me about the first time you told somebody that you're not really sick, that you make it up? What happened?
So the first time I told my physician, I was having a lot of physical pain, like real pain, and I was having trouble with my legs and numbness. And he wanted to send me to a neurologist. And the neurologist he was going to send me to was the same one that I'd had when I was faking all the seizures. And so I really didn't want to go back to him because I knew by that point he kind of knew. And so I decided I had to tell my doctor. And I remember I wrote a letter and I gave it to him. And he was so kind. He said, "This is tough. There's a lot here." He said, "We'll get you some help and we'll make sure you see a different neurologist." And it was really appreciated for sure.
Well, wait a minute. I want to back up a little bit. Why did you decide to write it instead of speak it?
I don't think I could have said it out loud. And, I articulate myself better in writing, and I wanted to make sure I got all of it down and didn't make any mistakes. And yeah.
So what was that moment like when you handed over that letter to him?
Oh, it was terrifying. As soon as he touched the paper, I started weeping, crying my eyes out because I needed to tell somebody, but at the same time, I was afraid of his reaction. And it was just such a relief to tell somebody. All those things combined to tears.
What were you afraid he would say or do?
I don't know. I guess I was just afraid of anger. Yeah, I didn't want him to say, "You liar. How did you hurt all these people? How did you use all these medical resources? You're evil," kind of thing. I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't compassion.
How long did it take after that to start telling more people?
It was right away. It's very interesting, but that day was kind of the beginning of my manic episode, my first major one, and it led into psychosis. And one of the things that I became aware of was the presence of God in my life. And now I understand it more correctly, but at that time it was kind of delusional and I had all these weird thoughts. And I was like, I'm going to tell the truth every time. Everything I say is going to be the truth. So I would go around telling people and just I'd like, "This is what I did," and everything had to be completely honest. Like, it was crazy. And it was kind of innocent in a way.
What kind of reactions did you get?
No one really got upset with me. Some people I think were probably thinking, "What a nut job." Probably a lot of people. I mean, it was pretty bizarre at that
But
point.
they faked their reaction, I bet.
Yeah, they did. I see what you did there.
So, what would you say people get wrong about factitious disorder?
The malicious intent, the thought that people are evil or that people with factitious disorder are malicious and hateful and dishonest through and through. Whereas I think can't speak for anyone else, but you may be honest in all other areas of your life, which I feel I am. There's a couple of areas of shame that I kind of cover up, but for the most part, I speak the truth. And this is the one area where I lie. So if people think that I'm like that in my whole life, the rest of my life, I wonder how that would go, right?
Is that part of the reason why you wanted to write the book and come out about this and even talk to me about this? Is if you know that you have this compulsion to lie in this way under certain circumstances, if you could just sort of pave the road by saying, hey, I lie about this, I've struggled with this, I want the world to know so that you know I'm being honest about when I'm not being honest.
Yeah, I definitely, that's part of it. And then also just that other people that are, having to deal with this disorder know that it is safe to come out of the closet, so to speak. But it's been cathartic and healing to have so many people have read that and still embrace me with love. In fact, I think a lot of people have embraced me more since I wrote that.
You've talked about your belief in and your relationship with God. I would love to hear more about what effect that has on your relationship with factitious disorder.
It gives me hope. And I think I said earlier that I have the attention of God and that love. I definitely feel it. I know I've been forgiven, and I know that there's nothing I can do that will separate me from God. And also just the faith community I've become a part of, because it embraces honesty, but it also embraces forgiveness and compassion. And so, even when I've done things really nasty to somebody, I did this to my best friends, and it was like I came clean with them, but they responded in such graceful ways. And I don't know that everyone would have done that apart from having that understanding of what forgiveness is.
As somebody who believes in God, I wonder if and when you ask, why is this the thing I have to deal with? What comes up when you ask that question?
I don't really feel a lot of anger or upset about this disorder. Sure, it's caused me a lot of problems in my life and it's made a mess of things, but I'm not angry with God for allowing me to have this. I also know that everyone's got a problem, or two or three or five, right? So this is just mine. And I think it's more common than people know. And I think part of the reason it's just so shrouded in secrecy because people are so ashamed. But it's no different than, having any other mental illness, really. And so I don't think any worse of God for it. I don't think necessarily that it's meant to be for a purpose or a reason, although I'm sure it has some reason, but I don't know what that is. So, yeah.
I wonder if you think about an alternate life where factitious disorder was not a part of it, how you think you'd be a different person.
I knew you were going to ask this question. I thought about it. So I had some thought at the time, but I actually came to the conclusion, I started to think about how I felt about it. And bizarrely enough, I felt like I didn't want to give it up. Probably because it's been a part of me for so long. I'm it would almost be giving a part of my personality away. And obviously, probably my life would have been a little simpler.
Fewer medical bills.
Yeah, fewer ambulance bills. I mean, we're in Canada, so it doesn't
right.
I mean, the ambulance bills can be high, but the hospital bills aren't really an issue.
Sometimes I forget.
Yeah, that's okay.
America.
Privilege, right?
That too, yeah. You also make me think about how, when people lie about being sick, there doesn't seem to be a lot of compassion for that. But at the same time, we all do it in the tiniest ways. Like the way we may extend our illnesses, or the way we may, even just the way we post on social media about it, maybe make it look a little more severe than it actually is, because we really could use a little extra love. Do you feel like having this condition, and I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but has kind of pumped up your own compassion muscle for yourself and other people?
I think so, for sure. One of the things that God really doesn't want us to have is shame. I mean, guilt is a constructive emotion because it leads to change, but shame just says I am bad, and it's like who you are, and that's not who we are. So I try and have compassion on people. I totally understand that we all need love and attention. And, you think back to childhood, and most children faked an illness or two or three, in their time. I don't think anyone's escaped that. But it's just, as adults, we like to pretend we've got it all together and that we're not little children, but we really are.
We really are. Well, Cindy Buckshon, thank you so much for talking with me.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
We'll have a link to Cindy's book and to her illustrations and artwork at ctpublic.org/audacious. Let's get back to Dr. Mark Feldman. He's the Munchausen expert we spoke with at the start of the show. I wanted to know, can this condition ever completely go away?
The answer is a definitive yes. Often it's a result not of psychotherapy as much as life change. For example, they might meet a partner and develop a loving relationship, and suddenly they're getting what they were looking for, and getting sick all the time is going to alienate that partner. In other cases, affiliating with church, either for the spiritual elements or for the social elements, has made a major difference. If they can develop a spiritual or social focus outside themselves, then the burning desire to mobilize attention and support in unhealthy ways really can go away. So I followed some patients for decades, and they have been totally free of the behavior. And in fact, I referred to one, I said to her, "You've really recovered." And she said, "I'm a little troubled by that word. I haven't just recovered, I'm cured." And you know what? She is.
In this episode, we've gotten to know Cindy Buckshon and hear her story. And you know Cindy as well. What would you like Cindy to hear you say?
I think Cindy has done an extraordinary service through her book and through her openness. Now, I will tell a secret, and that is she was using a pseudonym and other pseudonyms throughout her book when I read the manuscript. And I said, I think people would view it as more credible and know it's not fictional if you used your real name. And I think it is a sign of extraordinary strength that she ultimately decided to use a real name. She posts on Facebook about the book and about herself. And the book has proved to be pretty popular. It's written beautifully, and it's hard to put down once you start. So I owe her a debt of gratitude, and I consider her a good friend as well.
Well, Dr. Mark Feldman, thank you so much for talking with me.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Audacious is always lovingly produced by Jessica Severin DeMartinez, Meg Fitzgerald, Robin Doyen-Aiken, Meg Dalton, and Katie Tolarski at Connecticut Public Radio in Hartford. If you like this episode, you might also like the one featuring people with body integrity dysphoria. That's when people find psychological relief by amputating an otherwise healthy body part. We spoke with a man who traveled to East Asia to have his leg removed 12 years ago. Hear his reflections on life before and after the surgery. We'll also have a link to an episode featuring 2 recovering pathological liars. That's at ctpublic.org/audacious and wherever you get your podcasts. Stay in touch with me on the socials at Kyone Wolf, and you can always send an email to audacious@ctpublic.org. Thanks for listening.